Hey guys, I'm Mono, and in this video I will be taking a look at the video graphics settings for Hell Let Loose. First thing you want to do is go to your Steam library, right click on Hell Let Loose, click Properties, set Launch Options, and type all of this. I have tested this by using only the DX12 command. That seems to increase the frame rate quite significantly, so if you can't run this on DX12, that's a real shame. You really should. They have fixed the crashes that were mostly involved with DX12, so it's working pretty much fine now. Now, I have found that when typing all of this, I get around 8 frames per second more over a 100 frames per second average. So it does seem to do something. I'm not sure what it does, and you want to replace this refresh to 40 for whatever your monitor's refresh rate is. So once you do this, you launch the game. If you have trouble launching the game, just take all of those commands out, then launch the game, set it to windowed full screen, and try again. Sometimes if you're launching it on full screen, it doesn't seem to work. Just to get this quickly out of the way, I'm running a 2080 with a i7 8700K processor, so really a really good computer for this game. Depending on your hardware, obviously results will change, so I will try to talk mostly in terms of percentage changes to the frame rate. Now, once in the game, you can see the frame rate up on the top left, also with GPU usage and CPU usage. Right now, I have everything set to epic, except for motion blur. That's off, because why would you? So let's start from the top. Master quality, those are your presets. Full screen mode, I'm running windowed full screen, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes with full screen it seems to crash for some reason when running DX12. So yeah, use it on windowed full screen. Using full screen, however, sometimes will give you a slight FPS boost. Full screen resolution, that's my monitor's native resolution. Run this at ideally your monitor's own native resolution. Resolution scale does not seem to do much. Running it at 150, this should render the game at a higher resolution and then downscale it to the monitor to the full screen resolution. Doesn't really seem to do much, so just leave it at 100%. Vertical sync is turned off. I have a G-Sync monitor. I never use vertical sync because that's integrated into the own monitor. Turn this on if you want to reduce screen tearing, otherwise leave it off. Now we start to get into the really interesting part. Texture quality I set at epic. When set to low, it barely affects performance, maybe 5%. So I'm getting 105 frames there. Maybe 100 facing the other way, 107. Alright, so that's with textures low. With epic, it actually sometimes seems to give you a performance boost to run them on epic, and what this seems to affect mostly is graphics of certain textures, not the buildings, not the road, not the grass, there doesn't seem to be much of a texture difference actually in the game. Seems like most stuff only has a default texture, so that setting doesn't really do anything actually. It just changes some of these objects sometimes. Roofs of buildings, maybe LOD when far away and stuff like that, but not really noticeable otherwise. So just set this on epic. You might get slightly better frame rate by setting it on low, but personally I find that sometimes the epic setting is better. Next up we have shadow quality, and this is the big one. This is the one that's gonna give you the most performance difference. Right now, you can see there 103 frames per second. When changed, this produces a massive impact, giving you 30 additional frames. So that's a 30% difference when running shadows in medium quality. Now the difference is, and you can see it right here on this corner, is that you can see the shadows being drawn in much closer to your perspective, which might annoy some people, but for the 30% increase in FPS, I think I will take the medium quality. In terms of actual quality of the shadows, it doesn't seem to affect that much. It just seems to affect the draw distance at which the shadows are being rendered. In high settings, you get maybe a 10 frame, 15 frame boost. So yeah, just leave that on medium. Next up, we have the anti-aliasing method and anti-alias quality. This has the most significant impact in terms of what the game looks like. If you turn this off and low, everything looks real shimmery with jagged edges, which is precisely what the alias is supposed to prevent. Now, you can run the game like this, it just looks... everything looks very sharp and jagged and kind of shimmery sometimes. I think the best way to run this is using standard and the epic graphics setting. Performance is barely even affected, maybe 2 frames, so really not at all. The game does look softer using these settings. I think it looks better overall, but you basically have to choose between the game looking softer or looking kind of shimmery, because the other alternatives have this effect, especially noticeable on trees and some buildings, where it just, yeah, the edges aren't the best. Trees, you can really see the individual trees, leaves, sorry, but once you start moving, it looks slightly better. I think this comes down to personal preference. I personally cannot stand the alias that I'm seeing right now in these buildings in the background, which is why I use standard. Now, more on this in just a second. Also, affecting the quality is pretty significant. You want to run this on epic, as I mentioned. It doesn't really impact performance by that much. Maybe 5 frames per second. FX quality is really only noticeable when smoke is around. Either setting does not seem to affect performance by a lot. Running on low, I was getting around 89 frames on Carentan. Running it on epic, I was getting 85, so not a big difference. You will see a difference on explosions and bombing runs and stuff like that. You know, when you see a tank explode, and smoke effects are affected as well, but they don't seem to affect visibility pretty much at all. You can still see people behind the smoke at precisely the same moment in either setting. So personally, I like the big explosions and I don't mind the slight performance hit. I can run this pretty fine without it. View distance, you want to set this on epic. Unless you are absolutely struggling for frames, it's maybe a 5 frame to 10 frame tops, depending on the map. So that's it can be kind of significant sometimes, but not really. And this is a game where you really want to see people and buildings and everything at the highest distance possible. So just leave this on epic, sacrifice everything else. Foliage quality is an interesting one. You basically want to run this on medium because otherwise you will have a lesser competitive advantage. Now the reason for this is that with foliage quality high or epic, there's a lot more grass being drawn in and it can get really hard to see people that are prone. As you can see here, when he's prone with the Foliage set on Epic, I really cannot see him. And now with the setting on medium, you can really make him out. So just run this on medium. This will change. They are working on new grass and textures and stuff for the next big update, update 8. So yeah, this will change. For now, just leave it at medium. Unless you really want the game to look pretty, and set it on Epic. In terms of performance, this will impact performance by around 5 frames per second in my settings. Not that much, maybe a 5% difference on your PC. That will depend on, you know, your hardware and whatnot. But really, the only setting that has a massive impact on performance is shadow quality. Now we move on to post-process quality. This does have an effect on people walking through smoke and details like that. When run at medium, however, it seems to make the FXAA a bit less smooth, which is actually good if you're running the standard one. It just looks slightly better and things don't look as blurry. When set on Epic, things look... There's a kind of a ghosting effect sometimes that is present when running this FXAA, which seems to get slightly reduced when running post-process quality on medium. In terms of impact, this is really nothing. The difference is maybe 2 frames per second on medium to Epic, so just leave it off at medium. SSAO, you can turn that off. That will basically produce shadows in corners and steps and basically use the geometry to shade objects. It does not seem to be very noticeable if you turn it off or if you turn it on. There's a very slight difference in steps and interiors and stuff like that. But, you know, in terms of performance, it does pretty much nothing at all. And as I said earlier, motion blur at off. That's pretty standard. So yeah, those are the graphics settings that I think you should be running in this game. This will give you the best performance and things will be looking as good as they can. There we go, SSAA off. These are basically the settings you want to go for. If you're struggling for every single frame, obviously run everything on low. But if you can run this game at a pretty stable frame rate of over 60, then these are the graphics settings that I would recommend. Okay guys, that will be all for now. If you have any suggestions or comments, please leave them below down in the comment section. I will include my hardware specs down in the video description. Alright, thanks for watching and I hope I will catch you in the next one.